Hey everybody, it's Romania Black, and we're starting a new series that I'm going to call Soapbox. So I have had a lot of requests from people to review various manga and anime that I've actually already seen. So if you look down below, you can see my My Anime list to see what all I've already watched and what I've already read. And so I decided that I wanted to do a series because I started reacting to anime after years of watching other anime. So this series is just going to be me reviewing manga and anime that I've already read or watched. And so I'm not going to be reacting to them, but I want to talk about them and explain what I like about them, what I would change about them, or anything in particular, any recommendations that I have. And so I was trying to think of which one to start out with, and I just went back and reread this series, and I was like, man, I should start talking about it. So the series is called, in English it's translated to Classmates, but in Japanese it's Doukyuusei. And so when I had my old channel, I actually reviewed Doukyuusei the movie, and so the link to it is down below. There's a Vimeo link. You can watch my full-length reaction of it. Enjoy. But Doukyuusei or Classmates basically the movie covers its entire first volume. And so as soon as I watched the film, I'm like, I need to buy this. And so I went out and got it. And currently in English, they have the second and third volume released, but unfortunately they're out of print, so I'm waiting to get those once they come back into print. But they're called Sotsugyousei. The second, third one, which I believe is like spring and summer. And so, I was originally going to review with Doukyuusei, which is what I'm going to call the overarching series, because that's the original one. With Doukyuusei, there's three main volumes. There's one Doukyuusei, 2 and 3 are put together as Sotsugyousei, and then there is Official to Beloved, and there is Sora to Hara, and there is Blanc. So there's a total of 6 different storylines or volumes connecting this world and these characters. So originally I was going to do an entire video over the whole thing, and I realized, oh, that's a lot. I don't know if y'all want to watch a 3-hour video. So this first episode of Soapbox is going to be specifically about Doukyuusei and about Sotsugyousei, which if you've not read it, I'll go ahead and say I highly, highly recommend it. This series is wonderful, and I'm going to tell you why. So if you go down and watch the review and the reaction to Doukyuusei, what the storyline is about 2 boys that are in high school. They're second years. There is Hikaru Kusakabe and there's Sojo Rahido, and they're 2 polar opposite characters on the surface. Rahido is a studious prep school student that is trying to get into a nice university. He's very reserved, seemingly, and very conservative and very traditional and quiet and introverted. And Kusakabe is exactly the opposite. He's very extroverted. He plays in a band. I was watching Given around the same time, and so I got major Given vibes in the movie from his band. He sings, and he's just outgoing and super energetic and just kind of like a big goofball. Like, he's just clumsy, and he's just really lovable. And so these 2 meet each other or notice each other in their music class, and their relationship develops from there. And so the entire first volume just deals with them meeting, starting their relationship out, dealing with a few of the trials and tribulations of what happens when you start out a relationship, and then by the end of the volume, they decide to move forward and stay together. And so that's where that ends. And I thought, oh, that's a really cute story. Like, this was adorable. Like, the romance was really sweet, and it's just very innocent. It was like high school sophomore year innocence. And I'm like, I want to go ahead and read and see what else happens. It only gets better. So I'm going to talk about volumes 2 and 3, which I'm going to have a picture of them over here so you guys can see. But Sotsugyousei, or Doukyuusei volumes 2 and 3, detail what happens in the year and a half following Doukyuusei volume 1's events. So it deals with them finishing up their second year and going through their entire third year of high school up until their graduation. And then the volumes end with their graduation. Your main characters are Rahido and Kusakabe, but there's also a couple other characters that I'm going to mention, and one of which that keeps popping up in this volumes 2 and 3 is Hara Sensei, who is their instructor. And if you watched the original film, I'm going to start out talking about Hara Sensei because his character is very interesting. His character in the original Doukyuusei volume and in the movie doesn't flesh him out nearly as much, and this volumes 2 and 3 start to flesh him out a little bit more. There's an entire volume dedicated to him, Soratahara, which I'm going to review in a later video, and that will explain more of his character. But essentially, he's a 37-year-old that's working at the high school as the music instructor. It's known by the students that he's gay, or at least it's known by Kusakabe and Rahito that he is. And there's this not so warm and fuzzy, kind of creepy attraction that Hara-sensei has towards Rahito. And one of the big sources of conflict in the original Doukyuusei, in the first volume, is that Kusakabe is just mad that Hara-sensei is flirting with Rahito. And rightfully so. Rahito's like 16 or 17 and Hara-sensei's 37. Like, not only the age gap, but also it's just, morally wrong. So that becomes a big point of conflict. But his character is interesting because on the one hand, Kusakabe gets mad at him for flirting with Rahito, but then in the next scene, he's going and asking him for advice. So there's a very tumultuous relationship that they have with Hara-sensei. It's one of those, he's the only one we can relate to in the moment, so we go to him for advice, but we also don't trust him entirely. And his character gets a little bit more backstory in these volumes. So we start out, I'm going to put some panels up here, we start out this volume 2 of Sotsugyousei with Rahito kind of at odds with his relationship with Kusakabe. They've been dating for a few months now, and he says this line that he's acting more and more like a girl. And you take that line to realize in the manga that he's not as assertive as he believes he should be in the relationship. He feels like maybe Kusakabe is the more assertive one or the more dominant one, and he's not sure how to feel about that. He feels like he's kind of on the receiving end of the relationship, and he's struggling with that. And so he goes to Hara-sensei to ask his professional opinion. From there, Hara-sensei kind of tries to navigate in his brain, how far have these two gone? They seem like they're pretty in the early stages of the relationship. And he's like, sooner or later, they're going to become intimate with each other, and that will change the dynamics. And so he's basically just tells Rahito, he's like, well, it's just a stage that you're going through right now. You'll get through it. It'll be okay. You'll be able to go through with it. But he still has this infatuation with him, which is very creepy by and by. And Kusakabe is right to be like, get away from him, stay away. And fortunately, by the time you get to the third volume, Hara-sensei does back off a little bit. I didn't say this earlier, but spoilers. There's a lot of spoilers in this video because I'm going to be talking about the manga. I am going to leave some things out so that if you want to go read it, you can, but there's going to be a lot of spoilers, so proceed with caution. But in any case, Kusakabe meets back up with him, and a big discussion in these two volumes is talking about the future. Rahito early on gets jealous of Kusakabe because he sees him with a woman, and it's established in the first volume that Rahito is gay. Rahito only likes men, and the same thing as Hara-sensei. But there's this question of whether Kusakabe is bisexual, or if he's gay, or if he's... Hara-sensei's big argument in the first volume is he tells Rahito, he's like, well, we're at an all-boys prep school, and this relationship isn't going to work out, because once we graduate, Kusakabe is going to go off and find a woman, and you're not going to matter anymore. That's a big point in the first volume. And so Rahito's still recovering from that kind of manipulation. He's still in the back of his head is like, oh, is Kusakabe wanting to have a relationship with a woman, or is he okay with me? And he's very insecure about that. And so he sees Kusakabe talking very closely with a woman during one of the school functions, and so he worries about that. And it comes out in the volume that Kusakabe was talking to a record label producer, and she wants him to go onto his own label with his singing and his band. And so he didn't want to tell Rahito about that originally because he wanted it to be a surprise, and he wanted to submit his plans before he told Rahito about them. So it's a little callback to the first volume, because one of the plot points in the first volume is Rahito is planning on going to a university once he graduates, and Kusakabe is not. And so they're kind of at odds of, okay, what do we do with our future? Where do we go to from here? So I like that in this series, they handle the relationship in terms of when people have very different goals, but they're in a relationship, what do we do about that? And these are high school kids, so it adds that extra layer of hormones and angst and all that to that. But I do like that they have a healthy conversation, and he's like, I just don't know what I'm going to do yet, but I don't want to, submit anything down yet for sure. And Rahito and Kusakabe are very supportive of each other. So it helps to make the series more relatable and real, but also kind of like sweet too, because it's endearing that they both care about each other so much. And so, yeah, so I love this panel where Kusakabe's like, I'm always trying my best when I'm with you. And it's like, I'm just trying to be the best version of myself. And I find that so sweet. Like the manga artist, the mangaka for this, which is Atsumiko Nakamura, Nakamura's art is very, very distinct. Like I can instantly tell when I look at artwork online, I'm like, okay, that's Nakamura's, because of just the way that they draw expressions. And the line work is all kind of weird, and it's not proportional. And if you ever watch the movie, it's very much like watercolor, and it's very impressionistic, and it's not realistic, or it's not trying to be. It's all about the expressions and the emotions. And that's probably what I like most about their artwork, is that they're just putting it out there. They just want to have the emotions on the page. Like the background, like on this panel here, you see the pillows, you see the bedspread, but that's not what's important. What's important is the conversation and their expressions. So I appreciate that's intentionally what they're trying to do. It's not them being lazy. It's, okay, I'm focusing on the emotion because that's the heart of this story, which I respect. So getting back to Hara Sensei, we find out more about Hara Sensei and kind of why he's messed up. Because he does have this weird infatuation with Rahito. And in Volume 1, it's not shown in the movie, but in Volume 1, you find out that Hara Sensei, he met Rahito and he was in a bad place emotionally. Like his relationships had not been going well. He was in a bad place. He was lonely and kind of desperate. And he meets Rahito, who is objectively a nice looking young man, and he instantly falls for him. And it's creepy. And it's weird, but he acknowledges it. He's like, I know it's wrong, but I can't help it. And so it's like, okay, well, at least the character's somewhat self-aware. But his character creeps me out a lot. But I feel like in this series, at least in these 2 volumes, and we'll get to Sora Tahara later, but at least in these 2 volumes, it's explained more why he's so messed up. Because we see this relationship with Arisaka, who's this teacher that works at their school. And there's this really cute scene where Hara Sensei is playing the piano and this instructor comes in and sits beside him and they have this conversation. And as the conversation goes on, this Arisaka starts flirting with Hara and Hara's like, oh, okay. And they flirt back and forth and it seems like there's going to be this relationship, and Hara kisses him. And it seems like it's mutual, but then the Arisaka guy leaves. And we find out later that he went on maternity leave because he was married. And it's like, oof. So he was on maternity leave because his wife was requesting it, and you find out that he's married and he had taken off his wedding ring when he went to see Hara. And then Hara is just left with this emptiness of like, oh, I was fooled again and I'm alone again. So it's really kind of sad. And I love this line on this page where he says, whatever the emotion is, I only show half of it because I'm an adult. And it's like he can't be completely himself, and he can't open up and be totally honest like he feels these younger kids can, because he knows it can hurt him. And he's like, being an adult's realizing that you can be hurt by emotion and be hurt by being trustworthy and trusting. And so it's really sad. Like, I felt for Hara after this moment. I was like, oh, okay, I understand. He's had a lot of messed up relationships, and his view of love is completely skewed and kind of wrong. But he pops up occasionally after this moment, but after the Arisaka incident, he doesn't show up nearly as much, except towards the end, and we'll get to the end because that part is a lot of fun. But anyway, so one thing I really like about this series is the slice of life aspect. And so if you're someone that likes slice of life manga, you'll like Doukyuusei, because it's all about their relationship, but it's also about them day to day growing in their relationship, exploring aspects of it, figuring out, their vulnerabilities, what makes the relationship strong, what can they work on. And so I love this panel here where they're just talking about what they're doing. And Rahito kind of laments to Kusakabe because he's like, you know your path to take, and I'm still struggling to figure out exactly what I want to do. And Kusakabe's like, well, that's not entirely true. And so what I was saying at the beginning is that Rahito and Kusakabe at first glance seem like very archetypic archaic characters. Like, they seem like such archetypes. Like, Rahito seems like the stoic, by the book character, and Kusakabe seems like the carefree, caution to the wind, outgoing character. But in reality, they're very similar. They both are extremely compassionate, extremely emotional individuals. They just handle their emotions in different ways. And Kusakabe, for all of Rahito's talk of him being the dominant one in the relationship, Kusakabe like cries all the time in these volumes. He's like instantly emotional. He's kind of like Rin from Free. He's just crying all over the place. And Rahito's just like, Rahito doesn't cry, and that's going to be a point that comes up later on in the series. But I just love that they're so lovey-dovey, and that's part of the thing too, is just their relationship and them growing closer together, and you get to see them develop their love for each other more and more. It's extremely wholesome and very, very sweet. So again, we talk about halves, and Hara Sensei brought up that he only shows half of himself, and this concept of giving yourself up or giving half of yourself is brought up throughout these 2 volumes. And at one point, Hara Sensei says, well, are you going to give all of yourself to Kusakabe? And Rahito's like, just half. And Kusakabe kind of calls him out later. He's like, why'd you say half? And he's like, well, I'll give half of myself to you, and you give half of yourself to me, and we still keep the other half. And it's like, oh, that's kind of sweet. It reminded me of Full Metal Alchemist, where Winry at the end was like, I'll give you half. No, maybe 20%, 80%, and they kind of back and forth about it. So, this part in the series, before this part, I do want to talk about, there is a character named Tani. And Tani is the supportive character that was in the original Volume 1, in the original Doukyuusei movie. Tani is the friend of Kusakabe that's been in the band with him, that has known him since they were kids. In the movie, when Kusakabe goes to the house out for the summer, it's Tani's house. So there's a really cool plot thread in this where Rahito's a little jealous of Tani at first, because Rahito's like, gee, you're really close with Tani, and Kusakabe shuts it down immediately. He's like, we're not going to have this angst. Kusakabe's like, look, Tani's my best friend. He's totally into girls, not into guys. It's not a thing. And I loved that, because for a second I thought this series, I'm like, are we really going down that route where Rahito's jealous of Tani, who has nothing to do with guys? And the mangaka shut that up real quick. They were like, no, Tani is supportive, the supportive friend of Kusakabe, and he supports them being together. He does tease Rahito a little bit, which I like, that he gives him a little hard time, but in the end, I like that the mangaka chose not to make that a big plot point. What does become a big plot point is, so in these volumes, there is, we don't meet Kusakabe's family yet. We don't meet them. We don't know a lot about Kusakabe's home life, to be honest. Hikaru's very shut off and very private about what he does at home. But with Rahito, we learn quite a bit. And we learn, first of all, that he deals with his mom. His mom has a tumor, and they go and get it tested, and they find out that it's cancerous. And at this point in the series, I'll be honest, up until this point, I was like, this is really wholesome. This is so cute. This is a little slice of life, fun stuff. And when this plot thread happened, it completely takes the story in a new dynamic way that is so real and brings up some really valid points and deep questions about relationships when you deal with something that's a hardship that's not between the people in the relationship, but with family. And it's really, really good. It's handled very, very well. And so, Rahito is very emotionless when he's talking about his mom having to get tested and finding out if it's benign or if it's malignant or benign and all this stuff. And I love this panel because Kusakabe is so distraught and like, oh my God, are you okay? And I love that Rahito's just sitting here going through the motions of, okay, we got to do this, we got to do that. And Kusakabe's like, wait, what about you? Are you all right? And Rahito says he's okay, but Kusakabe, I love that he worries. He's like, I should have supported Sajo more. I should have supported Rahito more. And I didn't. I was just so focused on this one thing and trying to selfishly find out the information that I should have supported him some more. And so I love that Kusakabe is like, I need to support my boyfriend because this is a really hard time. And so we find out that Rahito is kind of working himself ragged. He's going to the hospital and seeing his mom. He's taking care of things at home by himself because we find out that his dad works overseas in Korea. He's not home. He's doing prep school, he's doing high school, he's cramming for exams, he's doing all this stuff and all this amounted stress. And Kusakabe's like, should I stay over? Should I help you? Should I do these things? And for a second, Rahito breaks and he's like, we can't afford to trouble an outsider, somebody that's outside the family. And you're like, oh, ooh, like he doesn't want to bring Kusakabe into his family drama. But I love Kusakabe's response. He's like, I originally said these things out of my own feelings. I was being selfish. But, and I don't show you in this panel, but you need to read the manga. But he says, if you need anything, say so and I'll do anything. And the fact that he's like, I will drop everything to help you. Just tell me. And it's so powerful because if you've had anybody in that situation that's a family member struggling with something like that, there is so much stress and there is so much pressure and sorrow and just questioning. And for someone like Kusakabe that's like, we're in a relationship, I'm going to support you and do whatever you ask me. It's very, very powerful. And the moment afterwards where Rahito is just thankful and they explain like what happens, like Rahito will take care of the cleaning and go to the hospital after school, and then he'd go to cram school, and that's daily life. And Kusakabe's like, I'm just here for you. And in the hospital, the mom notices that Rahito's in good spirits and that he's laughing and that he's in a good mood all the time. And she asks him, do you have a girlfriend? And when I read this part, I thought, okay, Rahito's going to lie. He's going to say either that he has a girlfriend or that it's not that, don't worry about it. Because it seems like from at this point in the manga, it seems like Rahito is a little bit nervous of how his family... He shoves Kusakabe away at first because he's afraid of Kusakabe showing up. And you find out, you're like, oh, is it because he's afraid his parents are going to find out he's in a relationship with a guy? So I thought he was going to lie about the scenario. But no, he comes out and says it. He says, I'm going out with a guy, and I'm sorry. Like, he thinks she's going to be upset. And here's where this manga does something beautiful. She's not upset. And you can take it as she's sick, and she realizes there's no point in me being upset, or you can take it as she genuinely is an accepting, open-minded person. But regardless, she asks Rahito to bring Kusakabe to see her. And it's adorable. Like, Kusakabe is so, like, overwhelmed. And he tells Rahito, he's like, oh, you have your mom's eyes. And you look kind of like her. And he's, like, so flustered. And my favorite part is this panel where she's like, what a good-looking boy. Not bad, Rahito. and he's, like, just blushing because he's like, my mom approves and thinks that my boyfriend's hot. And it's like, oh... And Kusakabe is so sweet to her and like gives her a CD of his music, and he's so nice, and she's just very open-minded and accepting of the fact that they're dating. And the part that really got me, that like just like tugged at my heartstrings, was that she says, even though he's all kinds of selfish, please take care of him. Like she tells Kusakabe, like, take care of my son. And Kusakabe just cries, and Rahito's like, are you okay? And he's like, why aren't you crying? And that becomes a point, too. Kusakabe's like, after the fact, he's like, you can show weakness. Like, you can cry. Like, he's like, I cried in front of your mom because she was saying all these wonderful things. And he's like, you can cry. This is a pretty big situation, and it's pretty dire. He's like, if you need to open up and express yourself, you can around me. I told you I'd do anything for you. And he's like, don't push yourself so hard. It's okay if you show weakness around me because I'm your boyfriend. And that's what we do. We can show our vulnerability around each other, and it's all right. And Rahito kind of brushes it off and is like, no, it's fine. But then his mom has a surgery, and it's this big procedure, and there's nobody else around. And Rahito calls Kusakabe, and there's a scene where he does show vulnerability, and Kusakabe's right there for him. And Rahito can cry, and it's okay. And he's like, see, I told you. So it's this beautiful, beautiful relationship that is blossoming despite the adversity that's going on. I love this panel here where it shows, when we're talking about Tani, it's showing them with their hands together inside the coat. That's like so sweet, like such a sweet thing. But yeah, the jealous person chapter where Rahito has his jealousy feelings towards Tani, which it turns out are completely invalid. From there, after that fact, we start diving into, because when you see the mom accept Rahito and Kusakabe, you're like, okay, she's totally accepting of them. That's great. And from there, this relationship starts to develop questions about, because in Japan, it's not entirely culturally acceptable for two men to love each other. And so Rahito, we get the feeling, has come from a very, very conservative traditional upbringing. And so he's very, very concerned, not about the mom anymore, because the mom seems totally fine with it, but he's concerned about his dad not being accepting. And we don't know anything about Kusakabe's family, but Kusakabe is so open about how okay he is with this relationship that we as the audience get the impression that their upbringings have been vastly different. And we find out later, but we just get that impression early on. But they talk about like their relationship developing and about children. And Rahito's like, it's not going to be a traditional relationship. And Kusakabe's like, well, we could adopt kids. And he's like, that's not what I mean. And so, and there's this mention of like, well, we could eventually get married. And he's like, no. And Rahito's just struggling with how his family and how his father and how society is viewing them. And Kusakabe's like, I don't care how society views us. I love you. Why should we let that get in our way? And so there's this little rift between them of trying to convince one another that the relationship is valid and it will work out long term because of their love for each other and not by what society dictates. So Rahito goes to visit his grandparents in Kyoto because he's decided that he's going to go to Kyoto University, which is quite a ways away from where they originally are. And originally he just decides to go off on his own. Kusakabe finds out about it and he shows up. And he's like, I'm not letting you tour this campus alone. No. And so he just shows up at the university to go tour it with Rahito. And it's really sweet. And we find out that Rahito, his grandfather, has a house that he no longer lives in and he rents it out. And so that's where Rahito is going to stay while he's in college. And so that leads us to the sleepover. So Kusakabe just showed up in Kyoto to walk around with Rahito while he's touring the university and to see the house he's staying at. And he's like, I don't really want to go home yet. So Rahito's like, well, Kusakabe, you can stay at my place since I have this house to myself. And I will only show you certain panels, but the sleepover is probably one of my favorite parts of the whole manga because it's just these two guys that up until now have only like made out and held hands at each other's houses. Like they've not had this intimate time alone. And so it's like their first time, like in little futons sitting next to one another. And so it's their first time. And Kusakabe gives him a hickey, gives him a love bite. And Rahito doesn't know what to do about this. And so it's this back and forth between these two characters and just them going through like what an actual relationship in high school would blossom out and do. And it's very sweet. It's very wholesome. But it's also very like blush worthy on both parts. And I'll only include a few panels here. I will say that the conclusion of this sleepover is hilarious in the most embarrassing way because Kusakabe kind of just, he ruins the moment. But with these two characters, it's just very, very sweet. And you feel through Nakamura's art that you can just see the emotions develop between these two characters and how their relationship is blooming and going along as the manga goes on. But yeah, I won't spoil it for you. You all need to go read it, but it's so good. It's such a great conclusion. It's in the 3rd volume. So it's and then I love this panel at the end. Like after everything's said and done, after the embarrassing moment, everything that happens, they sleep next to one another and they're holding hands. It's like, come on now. And then Kusakabe wishes him off and wishes him on his way to the university. So one of the things I really like about this is a series that involves two characters in a relationship that have very, very, very different career goals. Very different career goals. One thing that Hara-sensei brings up to Kusakabe early on is the idea that Rahito is going to pharmacy school. He's going to be a pharmacist. And so he's doing 4 years of university, 2 years of master program, and 3 years of a doctoral program. So he's doing 9 years of university. And that hits Kusakabe hard because he's like, oh, you're going to be away from me at this university for 9 years. What are we going to do? What am I going to do? He's like, I'm not going to college, so where does that leave us? And so they go on a date to try to work everything out. And along the way, Kusakabe gets a call and he gets invited to France for a week to audition and do this festival with his music. And so he's like, well, I can't turn down this opportunity. So he tells Rahito about it on their date. And he's like, hey, I'm going to be going to France for a week. You're going to be at university getting settled in. We'll just make it work. And I love the idea that as he's going to leave to go to the airport, Rahito's like, let me borrow something of yours and you can borrow something of mine. So they trade their scarves. They trade their scarves so each of them take it with them. And it's so sweet. But another aspect about this show that I really, really like is the handling of long distance. Because if you've been in a long distance relationship for any amount of time, it can be hard. And so this is the first time that Rahito and Kusakabe have really been apart since they started dating like a year ago. And they're away from each other for a week. And so they do like the phone call and they talk about stuff. And they talk about like what happened at the sleepover. And Rahito, I love his blushing. He's like, oh my gosh, we're talking about this. And they both just have this like yearning, like they just long to see each other. And the distance in that moment, Kusakabe realizes, he's like, man, we're only apart for a week. 9 years is going to be rough. And so there's that realization of what long distance relationship is going to be like for these characters. And I do like that the music executive like talks to him and says, you know, you should just keep pursuing the things that you want. Don't let anything stop you. And that translates not only to his music, but his relationship with Rahito as well. And also I want to point out in this panel, he's wearing Rahito's scarf. He's wearing it. It's adorable. It's so cute that they wear each other's scarves while they're out in public. It's like, it's perfect. And then once they get back, let's talk about that. So basically the week that Kusakabe was gone is right before graduation. So he's gone for a week. Rahito's trying to get settled in at the university and get everything in line and in order for when he graduates and goes off to the university right after that. Kusakabe's off in France for a week. So with all of that in mind, they come back right as graduation is happening. And their reunion is so good. Like they reunite at school and they give each other their scarves back. And I love that he puts the scarf over Rahito's head to pull him in to kiss him. It's like, And they decide to go back to their old classroom from 2 years ago. Because at this point, it's the end of their third year, so they've been dating for a year and a half, and they decide to go back to the classroom where it all started. And I love how this is kind of like the climax of the entire volume, in that a year and a half ago in the room is where they both fell in love. And it's like, oh yeah. And it's such a good callback to the first volume and to see how far their relationship has gone as a whole. And then Rahito says that he's in love with Kusakabe for the first time. And Kusakabe says that he loves him back. And it's the scene that follows is a very, very intimate scene in the classroom of all places. But everybody else is at graduation and Kusakabe's like, they're not going to miss two people if they're not there. And they both kind of break down and have this intimate moment with one another. And they're like, you know, we'll call each other, we'll text each other while we're away from each other, and then we'll see each other anytime that we can. And Kusakabe says, when I turn 20, I want you to marry me. And it's like, oh, that's like 2 years from now. So I guess they're saying if they can make it 2 years more in their relationship, then will you marry me? And it's like, whew. It's like, okay, we're setting up to put their relationship to the test. Can they be long distance for that long? And Rahito agrees. And it's like, And so, yeah, they just have that moment and they tell each other they love each other. And that panel of Rahito saying he loves him so much, Kusakabe, is like, so good. So good. And I like this establishment. They have kind of a little bit of argument before this where Rahito's like, Kusakabe wants to go to Kyoto to stay with Rahito, and Rahito's like, no. He's like, you're not going to settle for me. You're not going to move to Kyoto just because I'm there, just so that we don't have to be apart distance-wise. He's like, because that's going to ruin your music career and that's going to ruin what you want to do. He's like, no, we'll make it work. We'll make the distance work and be able to be with each other when we can, but we have to both strive to get things done so that we can accomplish what we want to career-wise. And so that's what they agree on. And I really like that. I like that neither character concedes to the other. They don't just say, okay, I'm going to drop everything to move in with you. Because a lot of couples do that. A lot of couples are like, oh, I'll go to this college because you're going to this college. And it's not what I want to do, but it's what you want to do. And that can lead to a toxic relationship. And that's what I was afraid was going to happen with Kusakabe. Was like, I'll go to the Kyoto. I was like, but your music career, that's not going to work. And I love that this manga didn't fall into that toxic trope, that instead Rahito was like, nah, we're going to make this work, but you're not going to just do things because I'm doing them. And I was like, yes, snaps. I was like, yes, please. So my favorite part of bringing Hara back into all this is that Hara Sensei, he gives them this best regards thing, and he's like, you guys missed graduation. And he's like, where have you been all this time? And Kusakabe's like, oh, we decided to get married. Like, doesn't mention anything else about visiting the class or anything. He just talks about the marriage plans. And he's like, best regards, see ya, bye. And Hara decides to call him out. Because this whole series so far, Hara has been doubtful that Kusakabe is serious about a relationship with Rahito. He's been doubtful that he's truly serious about carrying on this relationship and that it's going to end once he graduates. So Hara's like, okay, fine, kiss him in front of everybody if you really care that much. And he does. And he does. And he's like, see ya. And Hara's kind of put in his tracks. And I love that the idea of that time when we were classmates. And so Sotsugyousei kind of ends their high school career of them being in this relationship. But it's so good, guys. It's so good. And what I love about this series as a whole, what I love about our classmates here, what I love about it is that it's so real. It's a real relationship, but it's not necessarily, with some romantic stories, I feel like the angst can be manufactured, where it doesn't seem genuine, or it seems like it comes out of left field, or you're like, what is this? But the whole angsty points of this series are one with Hara, which Hara's character gets explained. He's pretty much shut down by the end of the third volume. And the only other time that Hara is even a plot point is that Hara Sensei gets Rahito some gloves. And that was going to be the gift that Kusakabe gave him for his birthday. And so Kusakabe gets kind of jealous and mad that he gave him the gloves. And there is a plot point in the manga where that's addressed. But it's resolved. The Tani jealous friend thing is resolved. And the only angsty point at this junction in the manga is that the mother does have cancer, and that's putting a lot of stress on Rahito. That's the main thing. So that at this point, I really like that what the story has done is given us these plot points and the developing relationship of these characters, but it's not this manufactured angst. It's very wholesome. It's very fluffy, but it's also so idealistic. Like, it's like the romance, like, I want a Kusakabe. I feel like I relate more to Rahito in this story in terms of personality and how I am in a relationship, but I feel like I'm like, I want a Kusakabe, man. I was like, if you can be more like that, that would be awesome. Because Kusakabe is such a cool character. He's so, like, fun and optimistic and bright, but he also, like, does get emotional. He does have conflict and struggles, and he is a flawed character at times. And so I really like that about these two, that they're approaching their relationship realistically. It reminds me a lot of Given, and I love Given. So if you like Given, get Classmates, because it's freaking good. But yeah, so Sotsugyousei is volumes 2 and 3, and I'm still waiting on those English releases to be released in a new printing, and I'm going to get those, but that's pretty much what those volumes cover. I highly recommend them. If you like romance, you will like this story. If you like BL, you will really like this story. But if you just like a good slice of life, high school manga that deals with some real issues in terms of being in a relationship, handling long distance, dealing with the future goals that you and your significant other can have. It's just a really good series. But here's the thing. I've gushed about these 2 volumes. They're not even the best part. No! We still have Official to Beloved, Sora to Hara, and Blanc to talk about. And I am so excited, y'all. I've rambled so much in this video. Like, as I'm recording this, I'm like at 41 minutes before I've edited it down. So there's a lot to edit and talk about. But y'all, I'm going to get off my soapbox and just recommend this series to you. I really think that you should read it if you haven't read it already. But yeah, so the link to Volume 1, Doukyuusei, the movie adaptation reaction, is down below. The next video I want to do is talk about Official to Beloved and Sora to Hara. And then the final installment, I'll talk about Blanc, because Blanc in itself, there's a lot to talk about. So I hope you all liked this review of Doukyuusei and Sotsugyousei. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoy this Soapbox series. I've got a lot of shows that I want to talk about and just kind of explain my thoughts and opinions about them. With this series, it's more kind of going through the plot and how it's handling things. But once we talk about Official to Beloved, Blanc, and Sora to Hara, it's going to be more about the themes, more about the storylines and the overarching things happening in the manga than just like a plot summary. So I look forward to seeing you guys again for that video. I hope you all enjoyed watching. Please feel free to comment down below with your thoughts, and then hopefully if you've read the manga, let me know what you thought as well. But otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Stay safe, take care, and I'll be back again very soon with more Soapbox. Bye.